I spent every single day in that store, surrounded by racks of dresses and rows of coats, my hands moving in the same dull rhythm of folding and hanging, until my body ached with the monotony. The hours stretched over me like a weight, pressing down until I could barely breathe, and I convinced myself that the heaviness of exhaustion was the worst kind of pain I would ever know. I told myself that if I just kept moving, kept working, kept burying my thoughts in fabric and hangers, I could get through each shift without crumbling. I thought that being tired, being drained, was the sharpest edge life could cut me with. I thought that until the day I learned what pain actually was. It wasn't the ache in my back or the burn in my feet that broke me. It wasn't the endless hours or the way the fluorescent lights seemed to hum louder the longer I stayed under them. Those things felt like struggles I could survive, obstacles I could climb over if I pushed hard enough. But what was coming wasn't something I could push through. It was heavier than fatigue, deeper than weariness, and it would not let me forget it, no matter how tightly I tried to fold myself into routine. Every time I walked into that store, clocked in, and put on my name badge, I thought I knew myself. I thought I was just a girl working to make rent, just someone trying to make it through. But I hadn't met him yet. I hadn't felt his shadow stretch over me. I hadn't been shown what it meant to carry a fear that clung to you, even when you left work, even when you locked the door, even when you lay down to sleep. That fear was waiting for me, though I didn't know it yet. He began showing up when the store was nearly empty, slipping through the doors just before closing time, when the noise of the day had already died and the silence pressed in on me. At first, it felt like coincidence, a customer who just happened to like the quiet hours, but the longer it happened, the more I knew it wasn't chance. He always came then, always when I was most alone. I felt him before I even turned around, the way his presence filled the space too heavily, the way his footsteps seemed louder than anyone else's. He would drift toward me like he had every right to, standing close enough that I could feel his breath when he spoke, close enough that I wanted to step back, but knew I couldn't without drawing attention to myself. His eyes didn't wander over the racks like other customers' eyes did. They stayed on me, watching me fold, watching me bend, watching me move. His stare was an anchor, pinning me in place, and no matter how much I told myself to shake it off, to focus on the clothes, I felt it burning into my skin. The smile he wore wasn't kind. It wasn't even friendly. It was the smile of someone who already believed he had won something, someone who believed that because I worked there, because I stood behind the counter with a badge clipped to my chest, I somehow belonged to him. Each time the door chimed and I saw his figure walk in, my chest collapsed. I prayed it was anyone else. I prayed the sound was a stranger I could greet and forget, but it was always him. I tried to busy myself, folding faster, rearranging shelves, hiding behind displays as if fabric and metal could shield me. But no matter how much space I tried to put between us, he closed it. Every visit was the same. Too close, too long, too certain. Until the silence of those closing hours stopped feeling safe and started feeling like a trap I couldn't get out of. One night, when the store was nearly dark and I was gathering the last few hangers, I felt his hand clamp down around my arm. The grip was sudden, sharp, so tight I gasped before I could stop myself. His fingers dug deep into my skin, and I knew immediately that it would leave a mark, a bruise shaped like ownership. I turned to pull away, but he shoved me back against the rack, the metal bars rattling behind me, dresses swaying like they knew something was wrong. His face was close to mine, too close, his words pouring out in a hiss that cut through the air. "You're just a salesperson." You can't say no to a customer. The venom in his voice slid under my skin, twisting into me until I couldn't breathe. I wanted to shout, to scream, to tell him he was wrong, but the sound never came. My throat closed. My voice buried itself somewhere deep where I couldn't reach it, and all I could do was stare past him, hollow, as if leaving my body was the only way to survive the moment. I froze completely. My arms didn't move. My legs didn't move. Even my breath felt locked inside my chest. He had stripped the air out of me, stripped the ground from under me, and for the first time I understood what it meant to feel like nothing more than an object standing in the way of someone else's hunger. The rack pressed hard into my back, but the sharpness of metal was nothing compared to the emptiness spreading through me. When he finally let go, my body remained rigid, as if it hadn't realized I was free. My arm throbbed where he had gripped me, the heat of it pulsing like a reminder, and yet I couldn't even rub it, couldn't even care for myself in that moment. I just stood there, trapped in the echo of his words, in the knowledge that the job I thought was simply about clothes and customers had become something darker. When I finally stumbled out of the store that night, my body wouldn't stop trembling. The air outside should have felt clean, but it pressed heavy on me, carrying his touch with it. My blouse was torn near the shoulder where he had shoved me, and every time the fabric shifted, it scraped against my skin like a reminder I couldn't erase. My wrist pulsed with a dull, relentless ache. The shape of his hand branded into me, and I kept rubbing it as if that could undo what had already been done. I walked home quickly, head down, clutching my bag tight as though someone might see through me, might know what had happened. By the time I shut my apartment door behind me, my chest was heaving so hard it hurt, and yet the safety I thought I'd feel never came. I locked the door once, then twice, then 3 times. I slid the chain across and checked the windows, making sure every latch was closed, every curtain drawn, but none of it mattered. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was already there, standing in the corner, smiling that same terrible smile. When I caught sight of myself in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize the person looking back. My hair was tangled, my eyes swollen from holding back tears, my blouse ripped down the seam. I looked like a stranger, someone stripped of dignity, someone reduced to something less than human. The shame hit me harder than the bruises, sinking into me until I couldn't tell where it ended. I kept scrubbing at my skin as if I could wash away the dirtiness I felt, as if soap and hot water could undo the way he had touched me. But no matter how raw my skin became, the feeling lingered. That night I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, every sound in the building amplified, the creak of pipes, the hum of the fridge, footsteps in the hall. Each noise felt like him coming back, like the door would burst open and he'd be standing there again. I curled tighter under the blankets, holding myself small, praying for morning to come, though I already knew that daylight wouldn't erase the darkness he had left inside me. The next day I gathered every ounce of courage I had left and went to my manager. My hands shook so badly that I could barely hold the notebook where I had scribbled the details of what had happened, the dates, the words he had said, the way he had touched me. I expected shock, anger, a promise that something would be done, but what I got instead was a smirk that crawled under my skin like a worm. "You shouldn't make trouble," he said, leaning back in his chair, as if I were the one causing a problem. "You should be grateful that someone's spending money here." I blinked, trying to process what I'd just heard. I felt my stomach twist, my chest shrink. Every word that had been my lifeline, every thought that maybe telling someone would help, collapsed into itself. I wanted to argue, to shout, to make him see how wrong this was, but I realized immediately that his smirk carried the weight of the store, of authority, of people who would believe him over me. I walked away from that conversation smaller than I had ever been in my life. My shoulders slumped, my head hung, and I could feel every inch of me retreating into nothing. I tried to tell myself that maybe he was right, that maybe I had imagined it, that maybe surviving it quietly was the only option I had. But deep down, something in me whispered that what had happened was real, that my fear was real, and that shrinking wouldn't erase it. The thought of facing him again, of seeing him in the aisles, of being trapped under his gaze, filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. Each step toward my next shift felt heavier than the last, and every evening the thought of going home only to lie awake and feel him there too seemed impossible. I kept thinking I could endure it, keep it inside, keep moving. But every time he appeared, every time he blocked me in an aisle, every time his hand pressed against me, I felt a piece of myself breaking off and falling somewhere I couldn't reach. He didn't stop. No matter how much I tried to avoid him, no matter how I rearranged my schedule, no matter how fast I moved or how far I hid, he kept showing up. He blocked me in aisles with that same smug certainty, a grin plastered across his face like he owned the air around me. He shoved me into fitting rooms, pressed me against racks, and sometimes, when I opened my mouth to speak, he clamped his hand over it as if my words were poison he needed to keep out. Each encounter left me smaller than the last. Each time he left, I felt a little less human, a little more like a shadow that existed only to survive the next attack. Bruises bloomed on my arms, my shoulders, my ribs, each one a silent record of his insistence that I was powerless. I hated myself for surviving it, for letting him touch me, for breathing when I wanted to scream. I hated myself for the fear that had taken up residence in my chest, for the nights spent curled around myself, wishing I could disappear entirely. But slowly, quietly, something inside me began to shift. I started carrying my phone in my pocket, keeping it hidden beneath my uniform, recording everything. The words he used, the threats, the sound of my own muffled cries. Every hissed insult, every touch, every shove became evidence, and in collecting it, I realized that I wasn't powerless in the way he wanted me to believe. For the first time, the memory of what he did wasn't something I had to carry alone. There was proof, there was record, there was a witness in the form of cold digital memory that couldn't be twisted. And in that, I found a flicker of strength. I began to see myself as more than the sum of the bruises, more than the fear that he thought could own me. I began to understand that surviving wasn't about shrinking or hiding or feeling ashamed. It was about finding a way to take back the space in the world he had tried to steal. When they finally confronted him, the moment I had been building toward for months, it didn't go quietly. He didn't apologize. He didn't back down. He stood there, shouting for the whole store to hear, words sharp and twisted like knives. She wanted it. She's just a salesperson. His voice was loud, angry, trying to make the truth bend to fit his story. For a split second, I felt my chest tighten, a flash of old fear curling around me, the same panic that had kept me small for so long. But no one believed him anymore. Not after the recordings, not after the evidence I had collected, not after the countless moments of seeing him corner me, hearing him threaten me, feeling him press me into spaces where I couldn't escape. This time the power wasn't his. The eyes in the room, the faces of people who had finally seen, they were no longer on my weakness. They were on his actions, on the truth of what he had done. I reached the counter, my hands trembling, and I unclipped my badge. I set it down slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of it finally lift off my chest. For months, that little piece of plastic had felt like a chain a symbol of the place that had held me hostage, of the job that had tried to define me by fear. And as it touched the counter, a quiet, unsteady breath escaped me. My hands were shaking, yes, but they were shaking with something else too. Relief, disbelief, and the first taste of freedom in far too long. I walked out of that store for the last time, the door closing behind me, and I felt lighter than I had in months, lighter than I had in years. The bruises would fade, the fear would shrink, but the memory of my strength, the knowledge that I had survived and reclaimed myself, that would stay. And for the first time in a long time, I knew I wasn't nothing. I wasn't a shadow. I wasn't just a salesperson. I was someone who had endured, who had fought back, and who had finally stepped to the light of being free